Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's great to be here as always. Thank you for tuning in. Happy Saturday, everybody. And I want to take a little bit of time today to talk about some recent developments that we got as it pertains to sensitive places. Now, if you're not familiar with that term, then I'm going to take you back a couple years to the Bruen decision, the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruen decision, which is basically says that you have to have text, history, and tradition for support of any firearms regulations that you have. So there has to be a historical analog for your regulation in order for it to be considered constitutional. Well, in that decision, they talked about how there are these sensitive places in the historical record where firearms were traditionally prohibited from being carried, right? Well, in that decision, the Supreme Court also said, well, you can't just make everything a sensitive place. Well, of course, the tryhards and the leftist movement did exactly that. They just didn't say everything's a sensitive place. They line itemed everything and said, well, that's a sensitive, and that's a sensitive, and that's a sensitive. And what they've done is basically set the stage where the Supreme Court is going to have to come back and line item each of those things. And the reason they did it that way is they're hoping to have a shift in the makeup of the court before that happens. So they want to slow walk as much stuff as they possibly can, hoping for a change in the composition of the court so that when the court comes back and looks at their list of sensitive places, then they can say, oh, well, you know, all of these have some kind of historical analog, or at least they get to sit down and cherry pick the ones that they really want. You see what they're going for here? And that's why the conversation about the composition of the court, the movement to potentially pack the court with more justices, and the conversation about who the next election is going to yield as chief executive, because they're likely going to get to make a couple nominations to the Supreme Court. Hugely impactful, hugely important when you're talking about the grand scheme of this whole movement, because that's going to time up pretty well with when some of these cases are going to be landing at the Supreme Court. So as far as today's video is concerned, there are three cases that were just decided at the Ninth Circuit as it relates to preliminary injunctions. They're not quite to the level of rising to the Supreme Court yet. And the Supreme Court has already said that they don't really like to take cases in an interlocutory posture, which means that they haven't come up to the Supreme Court for final judgment yet. So these cases are going to need to continue to be litigated, but we have some movement, and it's kind of a mixed bag. And I wanted to walk you through that mixed bag, because even though it is a whole mix-up of good and bad here, that's exactly what we want. We want those lower courts to do their activism and put it in writing. And that's what we're going to talk about after a quick word from today's sponsor. Mission First Tactical has been a longtime supporter of the channel, all the way back to one of the first products that we ever tested from them. You would recognize them as an accessory company, but they are so much more than that, in that they have diversified, offering everything from concealed carry backpacks with armor considerations to cool drinkware and holsters. Check out Mission First Tactical. We have 2 discount codes for them over on the affiliates page. One of them is the all the time everything, and then the closeouts code, which is like 50 to 60% off in some instances. So special thanks to Mission First Tactical for making today's video possible. So as I mentioned, there were 3 cases out of California and Hawaii. And I know, California, Hawaii, but this has potentially broad-reaching ramifications for the whole country if these are the cases that end up in front of the Supreme Court. So the first case, and I'm going to be using my notes because, again, there are 3 of them, is the May v. Bonta case, and that's my boys out there in Cali, Reno May, and Anthony Miranda from the Armed Scholar, as well as several other groups, including SAF and GOA. There's the Carolero case, which is Carolero v. Bonta, which is Firearms Policy Coalition, and the Wolford v. Lopez case, and that one's out of Hawaii. And there are several state-level organizations involved in each of those cases. So you can basically say it like this. All of the players are involved that you can name, except for the National Rifle Association, basically, which they don't do anything anymore anyway. So as I mentioned previously, these terrible places to live basically went through and listed every place they could possibly think of as a sensitive place, so that you can't carry there. Your Second Amendment rights and your right to defend yourself are void there, which is crap. Throw it all at the wall and see what sticks. Well, those places got sued and they received injunctive relief, and then it was appealed up to the Ninth Circus, where they decided what is and is not considerable for a sensitive place. And these are the things that they said cannot be considered sensitive places. So financial institutions in their parking lots shared by government buildings and non-government buildings. Basically, they went hard into the paint on the government buildings are protected sensitive places type thing, which is crap. It's exactly the opposite of the way that it should be. It's a public building. Public. Operative word. But basically what this says, if it's a parking lot and it is shared between a government building and a non-government building, then they can't prohibit you from carrying there. Hospitals, public transit, which is huge. This should not be understated. There's the concept of ligation. So, like, if you can carry on public transport, it's constitutional to carry on a public transport, and then the public transport drops you off at a government parking lot that is a sensitive place. Well, there's an argument there that can be made for the constitutionality of that sort of thing, because you took the public transport, you took advantage of an approved service, and then the approved service took you to an illegal thing. There's a defense there. So that's huge, even though it's kind of wrapped up and nuanced. Permitted events. So, like, you want to use a space that is over a certain size as far as an event is concerned. There's a festival or something like that, or there's a you've all been to permitted events. You know what they mean. A space that would normally be prohibited, but because there is a permitted event there, they can't just outright call that a sensitive place. And then places of worship, which is also big, because places of worship, in many states, they'll say that it is outright illegal to carry at places of worship. And then there are other states that say, well, you can't prohibit people from doing that unless the clergy or the administrator or whatever says that it's okay. And that's an individual case-by-case basis. I've done a fair amount of work with church security teams before, and I'm on one, so I'm intimately familiar with this sort of thing. I think we can all understand the logic of the places that are approved as non-sensitive places, right? Because it's logical. But let me show you the list of things that they say that you are not allowed to carry at because they're sensitive places. So we've got bars and restaurants that serve booze. So if you go to a place that is primarily food, but they serve alcohol there, then that's a no-go. Beaches, parks, playgrounds, gyms, casinos, stadiums, public libraries, keyword public, zoos, museums, and all of the parking places associated with those. That's a pretty broad list. And here's what I have to say about this. The concept behind the sensitive places, when you look at how it was originally set up and the reason why they initially said, hey, these are places that we're going to take your guns at the door and you can get them when you leave, places like courthouses and other tightly packed places, was all about the threat of accidental discharge, negligent discharge. So you got a whole bunch of people at a court case to see the local ruffian get hanged or, whatever. And the press is real. And you got a whole bunch of people like packed into a tight space. The potential for injury when one of those weapons discharges at the time frame that we're talking about is really high. So the idea was to mitigate the collateral damage. Well, that is no longer what we're talking about. Firearms do not accidentally discharge. They do not go off by themselves with today's technology, unless they're a SIG 320, a 2011, or a 1911. The initial revolution met at taverns and some of these other places that are listed here. So the concept that there is no historical analog protecting these types of meeting places for those who want to defend themselves is absolutely outside of reality. But again, that was the concern at the time when they prohibited carry inside of courthouses and things like that. That is no longer today's concern. Today's concern is that evil is going to come and visit you at the coffee shop or at the playground or at the beach or insert whatever place it is. So the fundamental conversation about the historical analog thing as it relates to sensitive places, I think needs a complete relook and overhaul for the concerns. If there was a concern that the redcoats were going to come over the hill while there was, let me look at my list here. While the militiamen are looking up tactics in the public library, do you think that they were just going to check their guns at the door? Or do you think that, no, they were going to be absolutely having those weapons? So the concept that we disarm people in these press locations because we don't want the naked show of force inside of those institutions because there's a chance for negligent discharge and high collateral damage does not mesh with the concept that we're dealing with today, which is literally evil visiting a location for the purposes of dispatching it upon the people within. And I think that if a true constitutional analysis is undertaken by the Supreme Court to balance those two perspectives, then all of this kind of crap goes away. Let me know what you guys think about this in the comment section down below. But remember that this is just an intermediate step. This is a means to an end. We want them to have lists like this of places that they think are supposed to be tentative places so that ultimately when we get to the Supreme Court can go through and be like, nope, 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 nope. That's the end goal. And that's how, in my opinion, you should look at all of these mixed bags or even setbacks as stepping stones to the ultimate end. Because the precedent has been set. As long as the status quo remains the same, then when we ultimately get there, good things are coming. That's all I got for you today. Happy Saturday. Have a good rest of the weekend if you do that sort of thing. Bye.